and welcome to all of you. Particularly, I welcome those of you who, in your deepest heart of hearts, cannot stand negotiating, and you still showed up anyway. So well done to you. We are going to talk about negotiation skills for both collaboration and leadership today. We're going to cover some very key elements of the art of negotiation. So this is something that I deliver in-depth workshops to clients. I have traveled all around the world working on negotiation skills. And I'm really passionate about this subject. I'll tell you a little story about my corporate background in a moment that will tell you a little bit more why. But, you know, I'm passionate because this is a key leadership skill. Negotiating is really just another form of communication. And more, there are occasions that require it because, as you may be experiencing in the current workforce, what we find is that people want to be involved in decision making. They do not want to just be told that there is a decision being made, that they don't have a part in the process. And so negotiation has become really a way of life. People don't want decisions dictated by others. So if they can have a voice in the room, they want it. But it doesn't mean that they always understand their power at the table. So I am an executive coach. I specialize in leadership development and I work with both individuals and organizations. But before I started my own practice, I worked for 20 years in the insurance industry. It's like I like to call it my accidental insurance career. And I know there was one person who signed up, I think, who also works in the insurance industry. If my intel on the app is correct. So holla to my insurance peeps. So I used to negotiate professionally for work, big multi-million dollar deals, multi-party deals with Fortune 500 companies, both domestically and internationally. And I used to think that I was pretty good at it. I'd never been trained to negotiate, but I learned it on the job and I thought that I had been doing a pretty good job. But about 10 years ago, I had an experience that kind of rocked my world and set me off down the path of learning about negotiation skills. We had worked with a client for years. Every year, their program would come up for renewal. We would issue them a renewal proposal, and then we would proceed to be beaten up at every turn. Our terms were terrible. Our price was terrible. Our competitors were eating our lunch. And if we didn't broaden our coverage and reduce our price, we were going to lose the business. Well, as a result of that, over the years, the program became broader and broader. We collected less and less price. They also delightfully started having more and more losses until we got to this point where we could no longer keep this client and still be profitable. So we had to tell them that we were not going to write their business anymore. And that's when something really quite delightful happened. That is when the client said, "You can't do that. No one else will write the coverage the way that you do." To suggest that I was a bit emotionally triggered by that would be to highly underestimate the level of anger and frustration and self-righteous indignation that I felt. But I realized at that moment that we had been violating some really key negotiation principles. We had given up our power at the table. And I wasn't having it anymore. So I became a student of negotiation theory. And that's what started me down the road of teaching it, both when I was still in my corporate role and then now as I work with my own practice. So I want to help you today, whether you love negotiation, whether you hate negotiation, whether you're somewhere in the middle. I want to help you reclaim your seat at the table or strengthen it if you already have one. How are we going to do that? We're going to talk very high level today about a lot of content because the principles that we're going to talk about today, they aren't particularly difficult to grasp. The difficulty is in the execution. So we're going to talk about the 5 negotiation styles, the 4 deadly sins, 3 strategies to combat the most effective negotiation tactic there is. I'm going to look for you to come up with 2 takeaways, more on that in a moment, and 1 success story. Here is what I ask. you will come to realize, if you have not yet already, that I am quite passionate about this subject because I know that it has the power to change your life, actually. And hey, let's be honest. We're talking about this in a professional context today, but everything I tell you absolutely has applicability in your personal life. Cue Robin, who was negotiating with a 5-year-old all summer long. So you may think about this today in a professional or personal context, whichever way you wish. If you have a success story, please tell me about it. Reach out to me from the ether later on and let me know. One final thing that I want to mention is that I'm going to use the word deal or proposal a lot today. I want you to replace that word or those words with whatever makes sense to what you do in your life, because this is not necessarily a sales presentation. I'm not teaching you how to sell. I'm teaching you today how to negotiate. So for example, everyday negotiations, right? You might be pitching your reasons to your boss of why you need to add to your staff. You might be presenting a new learning management system to your CFO that you want to replace your old archaic rickety one. You might be asking for a raise. Whatever you negotiate every day, don't get thrown by this idea of proposal or deal. Interchange it mentally with your thing. Okay, what do we want to get at today? There's this fantastic book, if you're a nerd like me and you like to read about how the brain works and neuroscience and how it impacts our decision making in particular. This is a great one, Brain Rules by a gentleman named John Medina. Take a look at this quote here. People forget 90% of what they learn in a classroom. We're in a classroom right now, whether you are at your kitchen table or at an office right now. So people forget 90% of what they learn in a classroom within 30 days. And the majority of that forgetting happens within the first few hours, which means by the time you have your well-earned evening cocktail tonight, a vast majority of that 90% will have gone poof up into the atmosphere, which doesn't mean that you're not going to enjoy all 45 minutes of it today. I know it's a big promise I'm making right now. What it means is that you're really only going to retain about 10%. So what I want to know today is, what's your 10%? Find your aha moment. Like I said, we're going to be covering a lot of content. This isn't meant to feel like drinking from the fire hose. This is meant to find that one or maybe two takeaways that you're like, wow, that's what I'm going to work on next. Because as I mentioned, the difficulty is in the execution. We don't want to pick more than a couple things to try after this. And that's what you're going to then do. Commit to trying at least one thing, maybe two if you're an overachiever. Okay, so let's start with our first poll. Alex, if you will please put it up. I'd like to just know from the audience right now, negotiation. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you somewhere in the middle? So Alex, I'll let you let me know when it's up. There it is. Okay. We're coming in. Somewhere in the middle. We got lots of in the middles. Oh, hating it. A couple people hating it. 3 hating it. Do I have any loves? Anybody loving it? Let's see. Oh, somewhere in the middle is still winning. Definitely winning. About 2/3 of you. Oh, yeah. Oh, I kind of love that I don't have anybody who loves it. I'm going to try to change your mind today. Let's see what happens. Okay. So I think looks like we're done. All right. So 71% of you fell somewhere in the middle. 29% of you hate it. 0 love it. All right. Maybe this is why, right? When we think about negotiation, and remember, as I mentioned in the beginning, negotiation is just a communication style, right? Or a means rather of communication. Our style of communication, just as we are all delightfully different, our ways of negotiation can be completely different. We all have different styles. So what are we looking for? We want to use multiple different styles based on a number of different things, right? This can be the stage of your negotiation, your counterpart style, your role, the balance of power, and also ultimately your strategic or tactical goals. So let's talk about then the 5 styles of negotiation. Now, I don't know if anybody here, you could show me by a raise of hands and the reactions here. Was anybody at the ATD conference last year when we were in a biblical flood? Yeah, so there was a gentleman from the Academy Leadership who came and talked to us about conflict management, and he talked about the 5 methods of competition, or not competition, of crisis or conflict resolution. And here's the delightful thing. When I saw that, I was so gleeful because I thought, oh, I teach those 5 things too, because this is the other interesting thing to think about. Negotiation and conflict management or conflict resolution is just negotiation when one side or more feel as if their values or their position is being trampled, and now emotions are in play, right? So these 5 styles are often used not just in negotiation, but in conflict management as well, right? So let's get into them. Competition, our classic take it or leave it. Oh, wait, sorry, no, what's the goal? Our goal ultimately, when we are less experienced, when we're not loving it, we tend to be more accommodating or compromising. But the people who expand the pie are the people who are the collaborators, and the people who are the most competitive like to eat the accommodating and compromising people as little hors d'oeuvres and snacks. So we have to work towards becoming more collaborative. Now, let's talk about the first one, competition, the classic win-lose, right? As we go through these 5 styles, there's going to be a poll at the end. I'm going to want to hear from you. Which of these 5 styles resonates with you the most? Which one are you, as you learn about it, think, yeah, that's kind of my go-to style? So competition, every one of these styles is important and has a place. When, for competition, it has its place is if you need to act or get results quickly, something's non-negotiable, and you've reached your walk-away point, right? This is the classic take it or leave it. I'm ready to walk away. We're not going to do the poll just yet, Alex. We're going to wait until I get to the end of them. The danger, of course, is that with competition, people who enjoy the competition style tend to overuse it, right? They might be highly competitive in many other aspects of their lives. And so winning takes precedence over all other things. If you deal with somebody who is highly competitive, you will most likely be able to guess that every time you see them across the negotiation table or you're having conversations trying to influence them, that they're going to be using this style. So it's pretty easy to show them little shiny objects to say, oh, you need to win. Here's a little thing I don't care about. Let me get you to feel all your wonderful endorphins, and now you're happy because you feel like you've won, while I get to wrap around the back and get what I really need while you're busy with the shiny object, right? Also, when people are highly competitive and they're dealing with each other, that deal ends up in deadlock. And then finally, of course, there's the revenge aspect. If you deal with someone all the time who is constantly railroading you with their competitive behavior, and now suddenly they really need a favor from you, it is quite common for people to want to get back, take revenge on the highly competitive person. So that is competition, the first style. Let's move on to the second, avoidance. So avoidance is interesting. A lot of people, when they see this style, they say, oh, I know. I shouldn't use avoidance. It's not a good thing to do. Absolutely, it has its place. And the 2 biggest ones are when your emotions are running high and when you don't have enough information to make a decision. A couple other areas too, if the issue is trivial or if somebody is full on competitive and they're not willing to be collaborative at all, you might say, I got to take a break from this. Let me know when you're ready to come back and work together, right? Unfortunately, avoidance, when you go away, it can be seen as passive aggressive by others. I always recommend, if you're going to use the avoidance technique, that you should put a time limit on it. Listen, my emotions are running really high right now. I'm not going to be able to talk about this until tomorrow morning, right? Or thank you so much for your request. I actually don't have enough information to make that decision at the moment. I'm going to go get that information. I'll be back to you by the end of this week, right? You also have to be careful of other people who are last minute avoiders because they enjoy getting good deals from you because they're silent the whole time. And then they just show up at the last minute and they're like, yeah, okay, let's get this done. But you've got to concede on these 15 things, right? Don't let people who are really good at being silent browbeat you at the end for concessions. So that's avoidance. Oh, nope, back, accommodate. So accommodate is the classic, I'm going to do somebody a favor, or I'm willing to lose the battle to win the war. Sometimes we have to use accommodate, particularly if the shift of power is not in our favor. Let's say we owed a proposal to somebody and it was due by Friday, and now we haven't put it out until the following Monday, right? Now we're in a little bit of a weaker position because we didn't uphold our promise in that regard. We might have to give something up. Know the value of what you're giving up, but know that when we do favors for others, we should only be doing favors with people that we trust, who we believe will actually, in turn, repay the favor sometimes, right? People who are highly competitive love accommodators because they win and win and win. They take and take and take from people who are like, oh, I'll give up this little thing. I'll give up that little thing. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Also, if you give up too early and too much, it can signify deep pockets. So the classic thing with us consultants, right, is that we'll say, oh, it's okay. I'll sell this program to you for cheap now because I really hope that in the end you'll come back and you'll do more business with me later, right? How sure are you that they're really going to come back and do more business with you later? Wouldn't it perhaps be a better idea to say, I'll gladly reduce the price on this one if you buy two? There you go. All right, so that's accommodation. The fourth style is compromise. Compromise is the classic, let's meet in the middle. Now, some of you may have heard of a gentleman named Chris Voss. He's a very famous former FBI hostage negotiator. He's got this great masterclass. If anybody over during the pandemic has been doing some self-teaching, if you've been doing some masterclass courses, he's got a great one. He wrote a book, Don't Split the Difference, Never Split the Difference, right? He loathes this because compromise, this idea of meeting in the middle, right, is something that we do in negotiation typically because it's driven by fear and the desire to not make anybody else mad. Well, why not meet in the middle, right? Something happens, though, with people who are known compromisers, who are known meeters in the middle, and they can be very prone to something called anchoring. Anchoring means that if I know you need 1 and I need 10, I'm going to start off at 20 so that we can meet in the middle at 10. You don't get anything that you want because you wanted 1 and now I'm getting 10, right? I'm going to throw out that extreme anchor in an effort to pull you up and meet in the middle to get what I want, which is really the only time you should ever meet in the middle if that's what you want to get out of the deal, right? The thing that we're looking for, the fifth final style, is collaboration. This is the classic expanding the pie. People who collaborate say, that's a great idea. How could we co-create to make it even better? How could we create an even bigger winning opportunity for us? Great. You want a new system? You want to develop a new training program? You want to hire 5 more people? How could we also do X, Y, and Z to this to make it even better, right? The thing with collaboration is that it takes time. It takes creativity. It takes a management of stress. And there are times, perhaps right now, this is a time for you, that you are not loving your wellspring of time, creativity, or stress. When we don't have those things, we tend to want to revert. The temptation is to go back to compromise. We also don't want to collaborate with people who are highly competitive. They're not there at the table to talk about expanding the pie. They're there to talk about winning. Might be time to avoid them. You can only collaborate with other people who are open to the idea of collaboration. Okay, those are the 5 styles. Now, Alex, please, if you wouldn't mind relaunching the poll. I'd love to see which of the 5 styles, competition, avoidance, accommodation, compromise, or collaboration, which is the one that you identify with the most? Now that you have an appreciation that there are 5 styles, Let's see, we've got some accommodation, we've got compromise, we've got collaboration. All right. Oh, accommodation is neck and neck with collaboration. No competitives. Where am I highly competitives? We're about winners. This is anonymous. I can't see. You're allowed to say. Let's see. We'll give it another 10 seconds or so. Yeah. Accommodation seems to be winning out. Accommodation is also quite prevalent. Anybody here a people pleaser? Right? We mistakenly believe at the negotiation table that taking a hardline stance does not therefore please people and therefore violates this desire for us to please. So, all right, so we came in 54% accommodation, 38% collaboration, 1% compromise. All right, so there it is. The key here, why we're doing this poll right now, is because it's really important as you go into negotiations to understand what's your preferred style. It's also helpful now to think about other people through the lens of what's their preferred style. How well is that working for them? How are you going to counteract it? And then think about ultimately your proposal, your deal, whatever it is that you're working on, your 5-year-old, right? What are the main goals? And assign a style to each of them. If one of your goals is completely non-negotiable, the competitive style is the appropriate style, right? There might be others that you're willing to compromise because you're going to set a deep anchor, and meeting in the middle is exactly where you want to be. Okay, so there it is, the 5 styles. Now let's get into the 4 deadly sins of negotiation. The first one, not preparing. The second one, believing all of your assumptions. Oh, it's delightful. 3, letting emotion get in the way. Typically, this is the biggest one for most of us. And 4, not saying no. Let's start with preparation. So, very interestingly, research has shown that when we prepare, we get a 7-to-1 return on our investment on not needing to go back and renegotiate terms later. Preparation is known to have the highest rate of return. It is also the thing that we do the absolute least on. So when we prepare, this is the analysis, this is the planning portion of our conversation here. We want to talk now about some very specific things. Preparation looks different depending on who you're pitching something to and whether or not you're in a seat of power with them, right? But ultimately, there are a few things that go into preparation that are deal agnostic. So let's talk about them. The first is relationships. Oftentimes, we view negotiations where the other side is the problem, but the people aren't the problem. The problem is the problem. Okay, well, what the heck does that even mean, Ruth? The problem means, let's take car buying, for example. There are probably many of you out there who absolutely hate the thought of buying a car. And by the way, my brother and father-in-laws are both car salesmen. I love them, so I'm still going to pick on them though. Most people don't like to buy a car because they don't like the sales process, and that's what they believe to be the problem. That is not the problem. The problem is, alas, Houston does not have a very good public transportation system, and so we all mostly need a vehicle that's reliable to get us from point A to point B. Coming in and buying a car, the problem is that you need reliable transportation. So every negotiator has 2 interests. It's the substance, the problem, and the relationship. So it's really important to separate the people from the problem here, right? Other side needs to be paid attention to constantly. What is the people aspect of your deal here? Look for ways to uncover and fill their personal needs here. Do they need to look good in front of their boss? Do they need to show that they're adding value to the process, right? Maybe they need a lot of time to ruminate and consider, are we giving them what they need to make a decision in our favor, right? So we have to remember that when we fail to deal with people sensitively, we're heading for disaster. They're not going to listen to us, and they're going to misconstrue what you say versus what you intend. And then, of course, it's going to reinforce prejudices and rational behavior gets thrown out the window. So remember the relationship, the people aspect of it absolutely has to be part of your preparation. Second, what's your story, right? The quote here from Arthur Miller, his very famous play, The Price. If I can't understand the story, I can't understand the price. Change price for value, right? Or whatever other generic word you want. You need to understand what your value proposition is as part of your preparation, right? What are the top 1 to 3 things you bring to the table that make what you want to get accomplished of value, not to yourself, but to others, right? So whether you're selling a service, whether you're gaining agreement to fire somebody, maybe, right? Trying to build consensus on a new course of action. What we know is that decades of goal setting research tells us that when we set specific, challenging, but attainable goals, we are far more likely to achieve them than people who are like, well, let me just go in there and see how it goes, right? Yeah, I'm just going to do my best approach. So the bottom line, the people who expect more and articulate it get more. Figure out what's your story. We also have to get ready for the emotions. This is absolutely part of the preparation. So if you know you get emotional dealing with a particular person or a topic or a situation, you've got to prepare. Do you need to practice your power poses a la Amy Cuddy, very famous TED Talk? Right? So more on emotions though in a moment, but this is absolutely part of preparation. And then finally, you must set your walkaway point. We cannot say no when we don't know what our no is. Do you know when you need to walk away? You've got to decide on that in the preparation phase. This feels very uncomfortable to people a lot of times. So you've always got to remember that this is a critical component if you are going to absolutely have the backbone to walk away. What is my walk away point? Here's the other thing I like to always mention when I talk about this. Your walk away point should always consider the amount of political capital that you are willing to expend. Okay, especially when you're dealing with senior leaders. Somebody had a question about how do we when we talk about negotiation with senior leaders. So when we are setting our walkaway point, we have to realize it's not only about what we want to gain, but what are we going to lose if we push, right? So consider the minimum you require, but then also consider what the cost is that you're willing to pay to get it. Okay, second deadly sin. We believe all of our assumptions. We tend to assume that whatever we fear, the other side intends to do. We also always assume that the other side holds the best cards, but what we know is that typically they're holding the same mixed bag of junk that we are. So how do we figure out how to test our assumptions? We do it through relationships, certainly, but we do it by asking questions and listening for the answer. This might be your 10% today, all right? Can you try to be the person who doesn't speak first? Meaning, the next time you go in to make your case to somebody, can you make your case and stop talking? It's very uncomfortable, right? We love to fill silences. When I ask you to do the poll, I'm like, oh, it's so quiet right now. Let me blather on, right? Stop talking. I cannot tell you enough. This could be one of the most important changes you decide to make, right? State your case, stop talking, listen to how the other side fills the void. Also, ask questions. Did you know that the person in the room at any one time who is asking questions holds the power balance, right? They are the one who holds the power. Ask questions. Tell me more about that. Tell me what your motivations are. Tell me what's happening here. Try to test your assumptions, right? And then finally acknowledging, hey, I understand budgets are tight right now. I totally get that. What's the cost if you don't do this though? And then be quiet. Okay, That's how we test assumptions most effectively. The third deadly sin. Oh, has anybody let their emotions ruin a negotiation? How many hands and arms do I have here, right? Yeah. Okay. Listen, it gets us all at some point. So I want to talk about how you can more effectively manage your emotions. But before we turn to you, let's think about the other side for a second. We now know, again, through very detailed studies in the world of negotiation theory, that other unrelated feelings that have nothing to do with your situation, your negotiation, can impact the way not only you feel, what you're bringing to the table, but what other people bring to the table. Is the other side, if you're pitching something to your CHRO or your head of talent development or whoever it is, right? Do they seem crabby? Is the weather outside crappy? Acknowledge it. Hey, how are you? Are you good? Right? Oh, no, I'm really bummed out. Slept horribly last night, whatever, right? The science tells us, the neuroscience tells us, is that we can actually affect other people's moods by acknowledging them if they are perceived to be negative. So be emotionally in tuned and somewhat empathetic, if you will, to the other side's emotions. Diffuse it by acknowledging it. You seem really stressed right now. Yeah, I completely understand, right? It clears the air for them so that they can move on. Now let's talk about you. So this is a complicated topic. And when I train on negotiation skills, we spend sometimes half days on the emotional regulation aspect of it, right? Sometimes it's really important for us to uncover things like our values, because once those get trampled, then we're starting to go into the conflict zone and not the negotiation zone, right? So emotional regulation is an essential component. But what we have found, again, through research, is that negotiators who suppress their emotions, who show nothing, are mistrusted by the other side. So great, right? Here I am. I'm telling you, you've got to regulate your emotions, but don't completely suppress them. Yes, I know. It's a fine line. But what we're looking for here is an ability for you to name it. These are the key questions you should ask yourself. If emotions are starting to well up, how can you control the emotional flooding? In the chat, I'd love to see right now, of all the senses, hearing, sight, touch, taste, smell, when we become emotionally flooded, which of the five senses is most impaired by emotional flooding? Keep my eye on the chat. Hearing, yes, Robin, yes, Michelle. Yeah. Anybody ever gotten into like a heated discussion with somebody? And thank you, Sarah. Yes, hearing. And you become so, whatever it is, upset, enraged, etc., that you completely check out and you bounce back in moments later and you're like, I didn't hear a word that was just said right now, right? So we know trying to suppress a strong feeling, it's not helpful. It causes mistrust on the other side. What we also know, though, is if we can identify what the emotion is that we're feeling, name it, truly name it. I feel sad right now. I feel irate. I feel whatever. And then try to identify some of the root causes. It tends to bring it down. And at the end of the day, if you cannot bring it down, please, for the love of Pete, use avoidance. Come back to the table later. Finally, it's very helpful to understand what your emotional hook is. So remember, when we talked about preparation, we talked about getting ready for the emotions. What's your emotional hook? And does the other side know what it is? Do our children or our spouses or our siblings or our parents, do you think they know what our emotional hooks are? Yes, they do. Yes, they use them. Yes, raise his hand. Yeah, right? So we need to know what they are because other people are going to use them against us. We've got to prepare. What is your hook? If you're a consultant, is your hook price? If you're an internal colleague and you've done a ton of work on something, you've stayed up all night to put together this beautiful presentation, and then your boss is going to trash it, because she's a micromanager and your PowerPoint doesn't look the way that she wants it? Is that going to bring on some self-righteous indignation? Am I talking about myself? Right? You have to know what your hook is. Know what the hook is. Okay, finally, the fourth deadly sin, not saying no. As part of your preparation, you have got to figure out what you want and what the walkaway point is. And before you walk away, I'll leave you with one last thing. This is my absolute favorite question. It can be used in almost every single negotiation when both sides are coming together to solve a problem. This question doesn't work as well if you have an issue and the other side doesn't perceive that there is any issue. Then they have zero desire to work with you on it. They're like, what? We don't need a new system. We're fine, right? We often think that when the other side comes to us and says, oh yeah, I don't like this, you have to fix it, we've got to scurry off on our own and solve the problem in isolation. I beg of you, do not leave. Say to them, okay, I hear you. How can we work together then to get both of our needs met? When people don't have a stake, or rather when they don't participate in the process, they don't believe that they have a stake in the outcome. They don't trust it as much. Keep people together talking. If emotions are running high, agree to go away, but come back again. How can we work together to get both of our needs met? Here's my beautiful proposal. It costs X. Okay, you're saying that it's got to be X less 20%, but that's really what my time is worth. So how can we work together to get both of our needs met here? Can I maybe trim something down? What do you think? What do you think would be fair? Or as Chris Voss likes to say, how am I supposed to do that? Ooh, very pointed, right? Okay, so final poll. Alex, if you wouldn't mind throwing this up, which key aspect now that we've talked about, being more prepared, testing your assumptions, using your emotions wisely, or saying no when you've reached your walkaway point, which is the one that's really resonating with you right now that might make it to your 10%? Okay, I love it. We're coming in all, oh gosh, it's like a heated battle amongst all four. Okay, that's great. Wonderful. Give me just a few more seconds here. So this is great. It's 20 to 30% based on the respondents, which means that I've hit upon something for each and every one of you, which is great, hopefully. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about today then is that classic negotiation style. And it is called, I kid you not, the nibbler. I cannot take credit for this. It was developed by a gentleman named Dr. Chester Karras. He is a very famous negotiation theorist, and there's something called the Karras method. You can bring them in and have them teach for many gazillions of dollars, your firm, the Karras method. The nibbler is not cute. This is the person who takes little tiny bites out of your deal. It is the most common and most effective. And this is what happens. You start, you have this beautiful proposal, and there it is. And then every day the nibbler whittles away here and here and here. And then suddenly, this is what your proposal looks like after the nibbler, right? So let's say you put a deal on the table on Monday, your counterpart says, hey, this is great. Thank you so much. I'll get back to you. On Tuesday, they're like, oh, this is great, but could you just add this one more component to it? And you're like, oh, that's not so bad. Sure, no problem. And then they come back the next day. Hey, everything's great. The pricing though, could we just reduce it by like 5%? And you're like, okay, that's not a lot. That's fine. And on and on and on it goes. And by the time you're done, they have nibbled away. And now you're left with a shadow of your former proposal, deal, whatever it is, right? So we have to combat the nibbler. Can anyone think of a great known nibbler in their life right now? Robin, your child, your 5-year-old, right? These are people who are really effective. So let's talk about the 3 strategies to combat the nibbler. The first is reputation. Are you dealing with somebody who is known for this, right? If you're working on a deal with somebody else and you have colleagues, coworkers, or it's not necessarily a deal, it's just a proposal. Who do you know that has worked with this person before? What are they like? Of course, if you say, are they a nibbler, to people who haven't taken my training or the Karas training, they'll be like, what the heck are you talking about? Fine, right? Is it death by 1,000 cuts, right? These are all similar terms. Do they just keep coming at you, right? Find out. You've got to know first and foremost, because the second thing you have to do if you find that you're dealing with the classic nibbler is that you've got to set boundaries, either deadlines. Here's my quote. Feel free. You could send me as many requests as you'd like. I will look at them in totality. What do you think? Do you think everything should be in by Friday? Great. I'll look at them all then, right? Or if they keep coming in, they've agreed to the deadline, but they keep coming in. Is this all? I thought we had agreed that last Friday was the last time I was going to get requests for modifications, right? Set the boundaries. And then finally, it's back to this active listening thing again, use the power of silence. In coaching, we love to use the term, let silence do the heavy lifting. If you are getting aggravated, this is the time to let silence help you. Could also look a little bit like avoidance, right? Don't rush to respond. Give yourself that time to think about it. Okay, so there it is. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do not appreciate the different styles, if you fall prey to the 4 deadly sins, if you allow the nibbler to take chunks out of your hide again and again, if you don't come to the table prepared, it's not negotiating, it's gambling. So I want to know now, what is your 10%? While you're thinking about it, I'd love it if you'd throw it in the chat. I know this was a lot of information. So here's more. You're welcome. Again, the concepts, not difficult. Execution, very difficult. Keep learning. Here are some great ideas. You don't need to, feel free to take a photo if you want, but the handouts are in the Whova app, so you have all of these there. I actually did update this slide with the address, the email address for the Harvard program on negotiation, if that's interesting. They've got great emails. Of course, there are tons of books. These 3 are probably the 3 most famous. I'm not going to recommend that unless you really love negotiation theory that you read books. I would say there are tons of great quick hit articles out there that you can read at any time. So we've got a couple minutes left. I know that was a lot. I hope you stuck with me. If you're a puddle in the ground, dry yourself off, sit back up, come at me. What's your 10%? Let me see in the chat. I'd love to hear it. Or any questions? Alex, did any questions come in? Oh, how do you control facial expressions? Ooh, with practice, Nick. You need to find an accountability partner who will sit with you in a meeting and kick you under the table. But seriously, have other people observe you in meetings so that they can tell you when this was happening, I saw it all over your face, right? Sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. It's great to get an accountability partner. Anything else here? Okay, I am not seeing your takeaways, but I'm hoping that you have some. I will say that please take the survey. That'll be my last comment. I understand you get 6,000 points in the Whova app if you do it, but I would love to hear, how was this? 45 minutes, covered a ton of ground. Yes, Janine, beware of the nibbler, right? We covered a ton of ground today, but I'd love to hear what was most useful. I take your feedback to heart. Elizabeth, thank you. You're soaking it in. I know it's a lot. It's a lot. Planning, preparation and testing assumptions. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. It has been an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. If you would like to continue the conversation, find me, coach@ruthcalabrese.com. As you can probably tell, I'm quite passionate about this. I love talking about it. So thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody, this takes us to the end of our session. Thank you, Ruth, for all your insights and great valuable information provided today. I took quite a lot of it myself. So it's been nothing short of a pleasure. Thank you to our great audience for your inputs, sharing, and remaining active, engaged, and collaborative. And we invite you to continue in the rest of the sessions for the day. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.